Equity and Disparity Committee, Equity and Disparity Committee meeting to order. And I'll hand it off. I'm not sure who wants to take roll, but I can only see a limited number of people, so I'll hand it over to a staff member to take roll.
Yep. Thank you, Jeff. We'll hand it over to Tanasia for a roll call.
Thanks, Jared. Zan Ozero.
Good afternoon.
Joseline de la Garza, if I'm pronouncing that correct. Jansen Hartley. Celeste Jansen. Robin Johnson. Andy Leonard. Jeff Parker.
Jeff Parker is present, and for the record, we'll be shifting to a different platform about halfway through this meeting, so I might be gone for just a minute as I shift to my phone.
Thank you. Santana May. That's all I got, Jared.
All right. Thank you, Janasia. Looks like we've got a few folks, members of the public on as well. All right. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. So wanted to start off today with it's a committee chair nomination and selection. This has been an agenda item for a few months now. I don't know if we want to shift, maybe to see if a couple more members of the committee join later, because I think we have only 2 folks from the committee on currently. So we might want to push that. But again, this is just election for a new chair. Jeff has so graciously offered to be the interim chair until we can find a new one. So, but I wonder if we want to shift that and see if we have any members of the committee join throughout the meeting, new members.
Yeah, Jared, I would request that we move it to the end of the agenda, and if no other members show up, we move it to the next agenda. And I really also just want to acknowledge, I appreciate people putting their name and organization in the chat. That's really helpful. So if you haven't, that would be please do that.
Great. All right. So let's push that to the end of the agenda. See if any members, new committee members, join. And I'm going to hand it over to Lawrence to introduce a topic to you all, some racial and ethnic disparity data.
Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence White. I'm with Youth Development Oregon, Racial and Ethnic Disparity Coordinator. Today we would like to talk about racial and ethnic disparity data. But before we get into that, I'd like to lay some groundwork on this discussion. Myself and a colleague of mine, Bill Hansel, he's not here today. He's our data analyst. He's not here today. He's ill, so excuse his absence. But as we were researching some data, we realized that there was a nexus between racial and ethnic disparities within the juvenile justice system, as well as some non-completer graduation data within the school system. So other than completer, non-completer data, connection between juvenile justice, racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system and that school non-completed data existed. And we thought as a committee, as an equity and a disparity committee, this would be a great opportunity to rectify some inequities as well as some disparities for all youth not completing high school. And we do that by using the racial and ethnic disparity data that we already have in existence, a robust amount of that data to really drill down and understand how we can reduce that, eliminate that disparity in the juvenile justice system. And at the same time, a byproduct of that really is helping our youth complete high school. The data really shows that any youth who touches the juvenile justice system is about 50% chance, they have about a 50% chance of not completing high school just by touching the juvenile justice system. And that was troubling to us, but what we found was even more troubling as we looked at some of the data was that youth who were involved in the foster care system or the welfare system, they had about a 35% chance of not completing high school, which was lower than the juvenile justice system, but still alarming. 35% is still a high number. What was even most alarming was homeless youth. They had a 30% chance of not completing high school. Non-completed data represented this, homeless youth. So when Bill and I were discussing this, we realized that youth who are in state systems, the welfare system, the foster care system, the juvenile justice system, they were not completing high school at a higher rate than homeless youth was. And that was kind of alarming to us. So one of the ways that we thought we could try to bring equity and eliminate the disparities for all youth, not just racial and ethnic, but all youth, is to really look at the data that we have a large amount of, and that is the racial and ethnic disparity data within the juvenile justice system. Drill down on some of that data, eliminate those things, prevent these youth from winding up in those systems, from touching those systems, and it will raise up the opportunity for them to actually complete high school. So if you could, Tanisha, can you put up the slides, please? So again, before we get into that, I think it's important to kind of understand what exactly is racial and ethnic disparities, and we refer to it as RED. Next slide, please. And understanding that is, reducing racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile justice system, the origin of RED, the measurements, how we measure these things, what exactly are we looking for, and the importance of the reduction, the why. And as I spoke to just a minute ago, the nexus in the trajectory of all youth and other youth serving systems impacted by juvenile justice system involvement. So basically, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974 sets the stage for racial and ethnic disparity. Prior to that, states pretty much did their own thing as far as handling juvenile justice matters, But the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974, it provided for the first time a unified national program to deal with juvenile justice delinquency prevention and control within the context of total law enforcement criminal efforts. So we call it the Act. So prior to the Act, there were roughly 500,000 youth in adult lockups and jails every year. 500,000 of our children were in adult settings. So you can imagine that they were definitely exposed to physical and emotional as well as mental harm and injury. So to address these inconsistencies throughout the states on how they handle their juvenile justice systems, and to improve the outcomes for our youth as well as community safety, Congress passed the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, JJDPA, and changed the way in which states approach juvenile justice. So the Act also established the Office of Juvenile Justice, Delinquency and Prevention, because it was critical that juvenile justice had a dedicated focus in a home, really, within the federal government, separate from larger other focus, separate from the other criminal justice pieces. So OJDDP is the only federal agency charged solely with fulfilling this role in centralizing juvenile justice for the states. Now, the Act comes with some core requirements, and there have been some reauthorizations since 1974, most recently in 2018 with the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, the JJRA, which again was signed into law in 2018, which reauthorized and amended the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974. So there's 4 core requirements that we are really looking at. and one of them is the institutionalization of status offenders. And basically that means, you know, status offenses are offenses that only apply to minors, whose actions would not be considered offenses if they were adults. Runaway, breaking curfew, possession or use of alcohol. If adult wasn't going to be locked up for this crime, children are being locked up for these crimes. So we want to deinstitutionalize. We don't want to put them in an institution because they committed a status offense. And we want to remove minors and youth from adult jails and lockup. If they are going to experience an adult jail or lockup, it should be for limited times before or after court hearings, no longer than 6 hours in Oregon anyway. Some states differ. So that's the that's core requirement number 2. Core requirement number 3, sight and sound separation. So if they are going to be in an adult facility or lockup, you know, we want no sight, no sound. We don't want them being manipulated by adults, because we don't want them in there in the first place. And then the last one, with the reauthorization of 2018, is racial and ethnic disparities. So states are required to, you know, assess and address the racial ethnic disparities of youth at all points in the justice system, all decision points in the justice system. And the reason for this is because historically the juvenile justice system has been completely unfair, disproportionate, and kind of harsh to youth of color. And this is since the beginning of the first juvenile court in Chicago in 1899. There's always been disparities, unfortunately, for people of color, youth of color, in the juvenile justice system. So that's where the racial and ethnic disparity kind of, you know, boards its existence. In 2018, prior to that, it was referred to as disproportionate minority contact, and even prior before that, it was referred to as disproportionate minority confinement. So fast forward 2018, racial and ethnic disparity. Now we're looking at key decision points, and we're assessing this data, and we're not just looking at the numbers, but really looking at solutions on how can we reduce or eliminate these racial and ethnic disparities. So there's five decision points that we focus on. In Oregon, it's referral, not arrest. In other states, it's arrest, but it's referral for us, diversion, pretrial detention, secure confinement, and transfer to adult courts. These decision points are where we identify the problem. Who is being referred to our juvenile justice systems? You know, are they being diverted? Are they being held pretrial detention? You know, are they being placed in secure confinement? We can look at these decision points and determine what the charge is, you know, what the gender is, what the demographic is, all of these things. We have this data now that we can actually look at and see if there's any disparities that exist. From there, we develop an action plan, and then we conduct an outcome-based evaluation. This is what we see. This is where we can, you know, zoom in and really target, you know, with some training, with some workshops, with some conversations, you know, with some collaborative work with all stakeholders involved in each county if necessary. All of these things can take place based on these 5 be doing. And then from there, you know, that's where the measurements come in. So based on the data collected at these points in 2021 and 2021, there are areas of improvement that can be made. And if you could go to the next slide, please. This data right here is for fiscal year 2021. And these are the percentages based on populations of at-risk youth from 10 to 17 years of age. I've kind of highlighted some areas. Again, arrest is not what we refer to in Oregon. We refer to as referral. But how our JAGES data is collected, it kind of reads that sometimes. So if you notice the percentage, all the percentages of Black and Hispanic and American Indian outside of Asian are much higher than the white percentage. And that's in the arrest and pretrial and a secure confinement as well. And if you go down even further, it goes to the relative rate index, which is compared to white youth, racial and ethnic youth experience a higher rate of arrest, a higher rate of pretrial detention and or secure confinement if the number is above 1. So just looking at this data shows that we have work to do in some areas, especially in the referral piece. Next slide, please. This is the data for fiscal year 2022, and it kind of grew a little bit, even more so for Black and especially for American Indian as well. And the ratio again is American Indians is almost 2.5 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system. Black youth are almost 3 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system. Pretrial, American Indian almost 1.5 times more likely to be detained pretrial, and so forth. If you go all the way up to the top, in the first set of numbers you see coming across, this 264 plus thousand white youth compared to 14,000 Black youth, 90,000 Hispanic, almost 6,000 American Indian. So their numbers are not even at a third of the population, but they're 2 and 3 times more likely to be entering into the juvenile justice system and being held in these systems. When Bill and I looked at this and we compared it to the non-completed data, we realized that youth who touch the juvenile justice system are again almost 50% likely not to complete high school or not to get the credits that they need, the credentials that they need. If we can make an impact in this area, we could affect so many of our youth of color. But then again, everyone benefits from this because the numbers indicate that this is a target population that could benefit from not being in these systems and being in school and completing and moving on to having a better life. You can remove the slide, Tanisha, if you like. So our ask of this committee is to really consider taking advantage of the data that we have in the juvenile justice space, really coming up with a plan to work with these counties on reducing their racial and ethnic disparities, and using all the tools that we have available. NPC research from Portland State University, they come out with a biannual prevention, a JCP prevention program, statewide evaluations finding, but they also present this to each county as well. So each county has kind of a snapshot of their JCP prevention programs, and we have a statewide findings of that as well. We have that. We have the data going back, 10, 20 years of juvenile justice information on REI, RI, racial and ethnic disparities. We have data from the schools that nexus does exist, where again, if we focus on really making an impact in the racial and ethnic space and the juvenile justice piece, we can have an impact as well, a very positive outcome for youth in the school, completing high school as well. So with that, if you have any questions, please, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Hey, Lawrence, this is Jeff. Thanks for that presentation. I really appreciate it. Oh, Zan, I see your hands up as well. Well, since I got the mic, I'll just ask the questions. I wanted just clarification on the data sets. The first slide, if I understood it right, was 2021, and the second slide was 2022. Did I get that right?
Yes, and 2023 hasn't been given to us yet. We receive our data from JJIS, Juvenile Justice Information System, which is controlled by OYA. So we're in partnership with them, and they send us the data once they collect it from all the counties. And we write up our state plans and send it to Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, so we can continue to get our grant funding to help detention centers and so forth like that. So we haven't received 2023 data. That was the last 2 years of data. We go back as far as 2000, and unfortunately the metrics don't move as much as we would like them to.
Right. Okay, good. That's all. And then my second question was, that's Oregon data, Oregon only?
That was Oregon only data. I didn't want to, I just kind of wanted to hone in on what we can do as a committee, and we could really focus on some of the counties with the NCP prevention findings that they have for their counties, as well as the data that says, this is where the high upticks are in these specific 5 decision point areas. Nationwide, it's not pretty either. But on Oregon, we have some work to do here, and I think we have an opportunity to really do some work in our own backyard to improve statewide graduation rates for all youth.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And I'm wondering if we could send those out to committee members, just those 2 slides, because I want to just get my head wrapped around them, look at that data even longer, because there's a really important story in there. So I appreciate you sending that out.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks.
Zan, you have a question?
Yeah, you cited those statistics about looking at the non-graduation rates, non-high school completion.
Yes.
And I was just wondering about correlation versus causation when we look at that data, and whether or not there are just an awful lot of the same driving factors that present themselves for a youth to not complete high school and to become involved in the juvenile justice system. And in some ways, it doesn't matter. We still have to figure out what the causes are and address them, because the number is ridiculously high. But on the other hand, I just I'm uncomfortable with it if we are thinking of justice involvement as being the only causal factor, because that's probably not.
Right, I completely agree. I don't think that's just the only one. I think there's so many other factors that we have to look at, and that we are still looking at. And like I said, Bill couldn't make it today, and he's still really purging through a lot of that data to find answers that not only make sense but are accurate. So he's again not here. This was some of his finding. I stay more on the juvenile justice side. Bill stays on the school side. So together we work together. So he would have a much more informed response to that question, I would imagine.
Well, I'm glad we're looking at it. I think mining this data and trying to solve these issues is important. So I see there's a question in the chat too from DV.
Thank you. So is it DV? Yes. So so the data that we get, it does have ethnicity and race attached to it, but it's not very nuanced. It's very high level. So other doesn't necessarily come up if it's specific to Black or Latinx or American Indian or Asian. That's kind of where we are with the information that we have demographically. Now we do understand that there's a lot of differences in those categories, but what we can capture from a statewide level, are those categories. What we can do though is, again, if we come up with some sort of plan to highlight specific counties, we could look at their data and really help them comb through it and see what demographic is really being affected the most, and what we can do, whether it's culturally or just systematically, to help improve those numbers in the opposite direction.
Hey, can I jump in real quick? Because this is Brian Detman, Youth Development Division Director. I've got to run to an appointment to get somewhere by 1, but just appreciate the overview, Lawrence, the questions, comments. Just for, I mean, this, we're trying to set some context. I think our Juvenile Justice Committee, right, spends a little more time on juvenile justice matters generally. They have heard a presentation by our partners at MPC Research on the juvenile crime prevention, or JCP, kind of outputs and outcomes. And that presentation went to the Juvenile Justice Committee last week, I think, if I'm not mistaken. We'll do a full presentation of the JCP data at the council meeting coming up in, in a couple of weeks. So DB, just for your information, and Zan and others, like, more context to be given around the JCP funded programs and the outcomes there. Yes, there is some disaggregated data there. And so it's JCP programs though on the whole, so it's not differentiated from county to county. So while disaggregated by race, it's still a broad representation of JCP programs that we're funding across counties and tribes. So keep that in mind. And I think, certainly to Lawrence's point around this statewide disparity data using the relative rate index, we have that statewide data. There is also county level data that Jay just has, and DB, I see you shaking your head. So sort of thinking Lawrence's role and job is around, okay, so what's actually happening on a county level? And in some counties, there are larger numbers of youth, both just youth generally, but also youth across different race and ethnic categories. So in some counties with smaller youth populations, it's like there's some nuance that we need to be aware of when we're dealing with really small numbers. And to get to this other question about like programs, I mean, I think there's we can talk, I think we'll have more space to talk about like diversion programs and early intervention programs, which are proven, I think, methods, around juvenile justice, to prevent kids from penetrating the system more deeply. But I think in this community, it's an interesting opportunity for us to talk both about the programmatic response, but also policy response, and upper like root level, like what, to Zan's point, what are the contributing factors, whether that's other systems that youth are touching, child welfare, education, and getting kicked out of school and not feeling like they belong, historical racism, discrimination, poverty. Like, there's a whole host of things, not all of which we'll be able to solve, but are certainly contributing factors in this conversation. I think what I hope we can accomplish in this deeper conversation is, given Lawrence's role in the juvenile justice space, what is happening at the county to county level? What are things that are working? But with our JCP resources, frankly, that are limited in many respects for the smaller counties, what's possible? But let's have a conversation about that and inform our processes going into JCP funding in the next biennium. Let's get this committee contributing to the conversation with the Juvenile Justice Committee in some ways that we haven't maybe been doing over the past few years, just because, you know, there's so much to do. But I think this committee does offer an opportunity for some deeper conversation. And so Lawrence said, I think, a lot of this at the beginning. So I'm just excited, appreciate the time. I know I got to jump here, but I think there's more to come. So I hope I've touched on some of the comments and questions, but thanks, Lawrence. Thanks, Tanisha. Thanks, Jared. Yeah, keep it up and we'll keep this conversation going.
So I guess my question for the committee is, are there any recommendations that you may have in moving forward? And that doesn't need to be answered today. That can be answered, you know, at a later conversation, like Brian said, a more deeper conversation. But just to kind of plant that seed, you know, how as a committee can we move forward? What recommendations do you have for the work that we are proposing to do with smaller counties, and also, you know, looking at contributing to ideas and policy and so forth moving forward?
Hey, Lawrence, this is Jeff here for the record. I really appreciate that question, and I also appreciate the hey, you don't have to answer that now suggestion, because I'm totally unprepared. I do. I know personally, I want to dig deeper in the data, and then also professionally, I'll just say, as a council member, I think we are at our best when staff can provide sort of a menu of options and we can help process that set of recommendations. I don't know that as a council, and certainly with only two of us on this call, I don't know that we're at our best when we're asked to make recommendations from scratch. And I just say that because that's been the reality of it. You know, the youth development department is filled with subject matter experts, including you and every other staff that's on the phone. So I will give deep thought to it, but I know that we have a history of really relying on the work that you all have done to sort of at least form the foundation of some recommendations.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And we always greatly appreciate the collaboration that we have, you know, with our council members. So thank you again for sharing that, Jeff. Zan, you have a question?
More of a comment. I just wanted to echo what Jeff said, that for me, I definitely am looking forward to seeing the numbers again from the presentation at the Juvenile Justice Committee the other day, and we had suggested some additional context for those data, and then thinking about the presentation you've just made and the question I asked about correlation versus causation. There's just so much to dig into. I want to see that we can us turn these things around, but it's also helpful to know where we have more of an issue. You know, I come from one of those counties where we have really small numbers, so it's very difficult to even identify the problems sometimes. But I also know from those small numbers that some of those youth, for instance, that might be insecure confinement at higher rates, sometimes it's because there's no other place for them and they don't even have it, you know, a place to go. So there are so many stories, and the data gets us so far, but then we really need to dig in and understand some of the stories and what's really happening. But it's work that we've got to do, and I'm looking forward to digging in more deeply.
I agree. And I also agree that the qualitative data that we don't have, we need to find a way to get that. And whether that's going, you know, to talk to folks or really understand what the problem is in their particular counties or their situations, their individual environments. Because like Brian said, each county is different. Each population is different. Each issue is different. So understanding the qualitative piece to that is huge. In coming up with the correct solution to minimizing some of the problems that we face. So with that, I will pass it back to Jared.
Thank you, Lawrence. All right. Are there any final thoughts on that? No. All right. Well, thank you all for the discussion. It's incredibly important work, and I think there's a lot that we can do to dig in to that over the next several months. Not seeing any other council members who've joined since the beginning. So Jeff, to your suggestion of pushing the chair elections to the next meeting, I think I would agree, unless anyone has any thoughts on that.
Makes sense to me. And just for the record, I'm willing to continue to be the interim chair until we find a permanent chair.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I'll be in touch with you before the next meeting. All right. I think next on our agenda would just be public comment then. Do we have any members of the public who would like to comment? I see a hand. Yes. Artist, is it?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm taking over for Kier just to contextualize. She moved on to a different role. So I'm still finding my feet. And just as a non sequitur kind of question, coming to this council for the first time, what would be helpful for me to bring? What would be helpful for you to hear from my perspective? I work at Harmony Academy. It's a recovery high school. And I'm just wondering how I can add value and be support.
It's a great question. I'll just ask, do any members of the committee have any responses to that?
I'll pause to give Zan a chance to answer first, and then I may have a couple of thoughts as well.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for that question, Artis. I think that as we look further to see what some of the qualitative data is beyond the statistics, that's probably an area where you can be helpful. And obviously the youth that you support and serve are exactly those multi-system kiddos. So it may be very useful to understand better what the data really mean. So I welcome your attendance, and I think the more heads, the better.
Hey, artists. This is Cord Bucher, Deputy Director, Youth Development Division, for the record. It looks like Brian's out. I thought I would just quickly offer just some context, since this sounds like this is your first time coming to one of the council's meetings. So our full council meets quarterly. That meeting is actually coming up in 2 weeks, not this Thursday, but next, I believe. And this is one of the council's, I believe, 4 standing committees. Each of the committees kind of has a different scope of work. I mean, this one is focused on equity and our work addressing disparities in the juvenile justice area, as Lawrence kind of talked about, and elsewhere. To kind of add to what Zan said, one of the things that has, I think, been really valuable for the council is hearing, more about what programs do. I'm not as tight on who we have grants funding this biennium. I'm guessing you are a grantee this current biennium. So if sharing more about the work of Harmony Academy is something you'd be interested in doing, you might mention it to your grant manager. And I think it's just good for us to kind of have a roster of folks that are interested. We can only meet with the council once a quarter, so we probably don't really get all of the different programs that we fund, and to have an opportunity to present there. But that could be really valuable. And as far as I know, you're the only recovery high school program that we fund. And we have a staff member from the division who's on the legislative recovery school work group. We're trying to stay attuned to that work, but it's not something I was familiar with prior to Harmony being a grantee, and that could actually be something for our council to hear more about, just because it's not something. There are not a lot of programs like that currently in the state. So if in the future you'd be interested in doing that, yeah, just maybe flag it for your grant manager, and we can kind of keep an ear out, because it's not uncommon that we'll have a grant manager conversation, say, hey, who has somebody who might want to present? Or as Harmony Academy, you're in the metro area, aren't you? Is that correct?
Yeah, we're down in Lake Oswego.
I guess we go. Yeah. So like sometimes we'll look for, programs that are in the vicinity of where the council meeting might be as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's, that is always really helpful. And I think just having grantees attend meetings and hear what we're talking about is great, just because I think, you kind of get a better understanding of what a council is, who we all are, what we do. And of course, it's probably beneficial for you to come to the council meetings. I think in probably December, we'll be talking about our grant processes. And so in terms of the next funding cycle, that is also a thing that is probably beneficial to attend and hear more about what we're anticipating. We work with the council to get approval for that process as well. So, so I hope that's kind of helpful, just as additional context.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Artis. And I'll also just read our director, Brian Detman, posted in the chat what Harmony is doing around disparity/equity, and how you're serving youth who are furthest from opportunity could be interesting. And since substance abuse disorder is an important topic statewide, we appreciate your involvement. All right, it looks like we don't have any other members of the public online, if I'm correct. All right. So with that, I think we can close it out, unless there are any final comments. And if not, then Jeff, I will hand it over to you to close the meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. Yeah, and apologies, I can't see everyone on the screen. So if somebody does raise their hand, just please let me know. One thing before we close and adjourn the meeting is, would be really curious, Jared, from your perspective, and Zan as well, like what are the things that we can do to encourage participation in this committee? Are we not meeting at the right time of day, the right day of the week, fill in the blank? And I'm curious if other committees are struggling with attendance, and if it might be time for us to sort of send a survey out to committee members to see if there's a better format, place, time, or otherwise to get better attendance.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a great question. And it's a tough question. I think at the beginning of the year, I remember, I think we did send out a survey and landed on these times. But yeah, I think to your point, we might want to check in with folks and see if we just want to look at a new time entirely. I can't speak to other committee attendance. Cord might be able to speak to that a little better than I could. But I think it's definitely a conversation that we should continue to have.
I'll just say that the strategic planning work group has had really great participation. We have a lot of folks who are not council members who we've invited to participate in that group, but we've also had, I think, Zan, you came to the first meeting maybe of that group, and we've had a few different council members who've attended one or more of those. But I think that happening with that much regularity and having some specific work that, every 2 weeks, if someone's coming, they're seeing work product that's being generated from the conversation that preceded. And I think that that's kind of led to some people being really engaged. And Bill, who wasn't able to be here today, but he attended the meeting last week, and he commented to me when we spoke afterwards. He said, it was really exciting to see how engaged folks were in that conversation. I don't think you want committees to meet every 2 weeks, but I think that what may be making a difference is there is more regularity. So I think it's like, hey, like this is happening on a regular basis, and there's work being done that feels like interesting to be a part of. And you're seeing, if you're coming, you're seeing your comments or your ideas reflected in what's coming back to the group. So that, it's not so much the scheduling, but I think to some extent, with the committees meeting once a quarter, I feel like it is, I know this is true for me we had the policy committee met jointly with the work group, and it felt like, I was like, hey, like I want to bring this to that committee because this is kind of exciting. And I think that's part of it, is that I think there's more when it feels like it's timely. You're like, what were we even talking about 3 months ago? I feel like it can be hard for folks to be like, oh, I got to be there. Whereas if you've got something that you kind of see something that's going to be happening, you want to be a part of, maybe that can be helpful. It's just my 10 cents on it. As Ann, I see your hand up.
I think that for me, it's also I don't think that 3 months is that much of a barrier, but knowing what's on the agenda and that there's something substantive on the agenda matters. Because if we're just meeting for the sake of meeting, then it's really easy for people to just say, you know, I've got competing meetings and pressures today. But when we were doing more of the work previously on land acknowledgement and on our own charter and definitions, that was more substantive, and we had better attendance. Although Jeff and I have been kind of the core of this group, and I think that he probably can speak for him as well in terms of saying that don't feel right as white presenting people being the primary people in a group on racial and ethnic disparity. So the primary council members. So I understand where Jeff's question is coming from, and we definitely need to do a better job. And the issues are real and they're important. So we need to be able to build that momentum and build a reason for people to attend.
Thanks, Ann. Yeah, Jeff, appreciate the question. It's something that, you know, I think we wrestle with. So yeah, definitely something that I think we can go back to staff and try to strategize a bit.
Well, thanks for that. And I know, you know, our colleagues, this work is really meaningful to them and important. They're passionate, they're smart, they're talented. And it may just be a bandwidth issue. And if it is, and the strategic plan stuff is taking more of people's time and energy, that's also really important. So we just want to find balance where we can get the broadest attendance in these meetings. So I appreciate it. Maybe we can, I know the agenda for the quarterly meeting will be jam-packed, but maybe just Zan and I can have 3 minutes to make a shameless appeal for participation on this committee during the big meeting.
Yeah, please.
I'm nodding my head furiously.
All right. Well, Jeff, I think I'll turn it to you again to close us out.
Thanks, Jared. Looking at my watch here, we will adjourn the Youth Development Council Equity and Disparity Committee meeting of June 3rd at 12:53. Thanks, everyone, for being here.